Did anybody mention these hats? I promised I would too. Okay, we are, the hat thing is, they are nice and warm, in case you need some hats. $10, whatever. I hope somebody mentioned it, because it makes no sense unless somebody does. So today we're going to talk about not necessarily deconstruction. So the idea of deconstruction is this. As you go to church, how many were raised in church or who have gone to church for 5 years or more? Okay, so many of us. Okay. So the longer you're in church, you start to ask questions. How many know that when you're in a church, questions aren't always well received? Yeah, okay. Don't ask questions. And so sometimes the older you get in asking those questions, and the more cemented the church becomes in their way of thinking, there can be friction with the people who attend and the people who have been there for a while, right? And this goes back to the dawn of time, right? And questions are asked. And so what I wanted to talk about today is a bit of deconstruction, but it's really, what does it look like to attend a church for a long time, to be a part of a healthy situation, to be able to ask questions, and what should the church's response be to that, right? So I really hope this is a fun discussion. We have two people, one right off the bat, and then we'll introduce somebody else later. The first one, I have three friends here from high school, but I say high school. The two who are not up here today have actually been in my life probably since close to birth, but at least kindergarten. And that's Carrie, and that's Clay's husband. I'm going to introduce Clay in a second. And then Mark. And they if anybody see the picture I sent out today in this week in the church newsletter, so Mark is the guy on the right, Clay was the guy in the middle, and because we were part of a rap group called KFC, Kickin' for Christ. And guys, it was that cool. It was that cool. Because we're I'm not going to prove it here. So I'm going to introduce Clay. Clay, would you come up here, please? Clay Davis, and give it up. That one there, fine. So it's not so awkward. You take that and, yeah.
I'm right-handed.
All right, so, okay. So we're going to get right into this, Clay. Thanks for being here, all the way from Columbus, Ohio.
Yes, Columbus, Ohio. I don't care about the Buckeyes, so I'll just get that right out the bat.
Amen. So that's why I had him here. So tell me quickly about your story, your spiritual story, maybe in less than 5 minutes. And
I am nearing 50 myself, so that's roughly a minute per year. I don't know if I can pull that off.
A minute per decade.
That's right, yes, sorry. And cognitive decline has kicked in.
And the good news is you hate to explain things in detail.
True. All right, so I did grow up in the church. I was a pastor's kid for several years until that imploded in a spectacular fashion, which landed us at another church, which was pastored by the original, as far as I'm concerned, the original Pastor Holman.
The OG.
In reality, he's not, but he is to me. Yeah. The original Pastor Holman, which introduced me to this
fantastic, it's fine.
Fantastic human being, Marty Holman. That was an independent Baptist church, which was slightly different from the faith traditions we'd been bouncing around in at that time. We attended a small Christian school, which had a lot of biblical integration, or attempted to have a lot of biblical integration with the educational aspect of it. But it's interesting. For those of you that know Marty, sometimes details are a little fuzzy, and we did have this conversation about, hey, we're going to have this conversation, but I don't know that we ever talked about that it was around deconstruction.
Yeah, it's not. That's why I kind of moved away from that word.
Well, no, but I think it's a good word, and I think it's interesting, particularly as it relates to the question that you asked, in that, I think as far as a response is concerned, and thinking about my own life, my own faith journey, and things of that nature, I think the initial response of a lot of churches and believers and bodies is to try and tamp down deconstruction. Like, we don't want people deconstructing their faith. But I'll say for me personally, and I think kind of writ large, deconstruction is a very important process for anyone who grew up in the church, and probably even for people who had an initial conversion experience or faith experience and then have to, go on with like, okay, well then what's the rest of my life look like? Because it becomes necessary. It's a necessary component to deconstruct that, examine it at its core, right? And then the key component is reconstructing it back into your own life, which I think is something that I probably did through my late teens and well into my 20s and probably even into my 30s. It's kind of an ongoing process as well. But so I think the reconstruction portion is what a lot of people are falling out of today. But that, I will say, that deconstruction process, examination, and reconstruction process, for me personally, was very, very important. And as far as the response is concerned, I would say that's an important response to that. Is that less than 5 minutes on the?
It is.
Okay.
It's great.
Right.
So I mean, for years now, you have gone to another church. You and Carrie. Why do you guys? You raise your kids there. You continue to you continue to grow old there. She doesn't. But why do you still go to church?
Why do I still go to church? Okay, so I think the deconstruction, examination, reconstruction process is an important question. That why I go to church today is it is very different than the reason I went to church when I was in my teens and early 20s. And I know you probably think, isn't he still in his early 20s? I am not. So, initially I would say I went to church in those early years, in the early deconstruction years and examination years. I went to church because we went to church. That's what we did. That's what my family did. Just what we did. We went to church. As I became an adult and started that deconstruction process, you do examine. Other priorities come into play. You start to have kids. There's sports, right? All those. Well, not my kids. My kids didn't do sports, but other people's kids did sports. And there's other things. And then of course, job, career, all that stuff. It'd be really nice to not have some commitment on a weekend day that is forcing me to be somewhere when I could very easily use that time for something else. And so obviously you do have to kind of dig into that a little bit and start to examine, why am I going to church? And, it's kind of a larger question about, what are we doing? What am I doing with my life? When I said that, that I would follow Jesus, what does that actually mean? And kind of digging into that and into the rhythms of life. I think I have quite a few bullet points. Do you want me to go through the bullet points?
Yeah, go through the bullet points.
So at a high level, I sent you a couple of, you asked me for some scriptures. Are they?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all ready.
It's all ready. All right. See, again, a lot of details were fuzzy exactly how this was going to go down. All right. So I would say, in the short answer, the reason that I go to church is for spiritual formation, is for part of an intentional spiritual formation. To pursue discipleship, Okay. That's the short answer. The longer answer is, I kind of broke it down into a couple of things. First of all, we're commanded to go to church, essentially. That's how I read it anyways. Hebrews 12, 24 through 25. Anybody? No?
Yeah, it's there.
It's not going up. All right.
It is up.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay, I can't see. All right, it says, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near.
So did you write 12? Because I think it's 10.
Oh, I did write 12. It is 10. There you go. See?
The details on me are fuzzy, though.
The details are fuzzy. Every once in a while, he pulls one out. All right, fair enough. 10. Thank you for the correction. He likes to correct me. So essentially, I read that as a command that, we are to gather together. The believers in the body are to gather together. We see that then demonstrated for us. The early followers modeled that for us in Acts 2:42 through 47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayers. I'm skipping some. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes. They received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all people. And the Lord added to their number day by day as those are being saved. So when we look at the earliest followers of Jesus after the ascension and he was crucified and all that, they gathered. And so the earliest church, as it were. They kind of were modeling this for us as to how they were going to live their lives together as followers. So we see that. And then for me also, Jesus only gives us a couple of commandments, really, in the New Testament. Romans 12:12 is important for me on that. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And so when I think about that, I think, what does it mean to pursue the renewal of your mind, right? Pursuing the renewal of your mind is an intentional action. It's a gradual action. It takes place over time, and it takes place through discipleship. Sorry, I lost my space. Jesus said, follow me, right? And he said it something like 24 times in the New Testament, which begs the question of, like, what does that mean to follow me? Like, we talk a lot about placing our faith in Jesus, but then what does it mean to follow him? What does that actually translate into in our day-to-day life? Great. I said I'm going to follow him 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it is, 5 years ago, 5 days ago, 5 hours ago. But what does the next phase look like? What does it mean to follow him? And so that's when I look back to those early, the early iterations of the church, even the disciples themselves. What did they do? They met together, they prayed together, they received instruction and teaching from the scriptures that they had at the time. And so there's like multiple facets to it. And then kind of related to that, going back to that idea of commands, Matthew 28:19, Jesus said, go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, right? And so there's that word disciples. What does a disciple mean? What does that mean? He didn't say go around and make them make professions of faith by the sword, and if not, cut their heads off, Charlemagne style. He said go and make disciples, right? So we have to ask the question, what is discipleship? What's the discipleship process look like? And what does that mean to you on a day-to-day basis as you move through your life? Can we go further?
Yeah, keep going.
All right.
Preach.
Preach. I don't preach. I'm a layman, as they like to say. And so I kind of stumbled across this concept, actually just very, very recently, or the idea of it, which helped me in thinking through this process of, I think a lot of times when we read Scripture and when we think about what it's saying and what Jesus was saying, it's the idea of deconstruction is very important because we are reading it through the lens of our 21st century Western viewpoint. It's just not possible to not, right? But that's not how it was written. It's not the world that it was written into at the time. And so when Jesus said, follow me, he said that in a context and in a culture that was very accustomed to a rabbinical kind of structure, in that there were rabbis of varying types, and people would follow the rabbis. And so when he said, follow me as a rabbi, it would be understood to them what he meant by that. It's not really understood to us what he meant by that, because in this context, probably in this place, I can tell you in Columbus, Ohio, the concept of a rabbi outside of some very specific communities is not well known. And certainly from a cultural standpoint, it doesn't exist in the same way that it did then. What it meant was literally follow that person, do as they do, live as they live, attempting to model yourself after them until your behaviors and your ways of thinking and your ways of living align with theirs. The closest that we would have to it today would be like an apprenticeship in a trade. So if you guys know anybody that's ever been in, some sort of skilled trade, apprenticeship is a common concept in that world. I don't know anything. He knows everything. I go and I work with him for many years, learning this trade, learning how to do it. It means I get up when he gets up. It means I get the tools that he has. It means that he shows me and teaches me these skills, these ways of being over a long period of time. and I gradually become more and more like the master in the apprenticeship relationship. So that would be kind of the closest analog that I think we have today to what they would have had as a kind of rabbinical way of being at the time. And so when we talk about discipleship and he says, follow me, that's really what he means. And so then we have to think, okay, well, in our world, in our context, what does that actually look like? How do I go about doing that, right?
So making it very specific, what does that look like in your church?
Okay, that's a great
or
question.
does it translate?
Yeah. So it does. Every church by its nature is a little different and imperfect in its own way, right? So in our church, very specifically, we're structured around the concept of small groups. We're not a huge church. We have about 150, maybe 200 people or something like that. And we like to say that we're a group of small groups that gets together. But what that means is that we do gather in much smaller groups, attempting to live life together is the buzzword of our day for that kind of thing. But I think we try to mean it as far as like really engaging in one another's lives. So we kind of have a multi-pronged approach to that of gathering in those small groups where we attempt to live life together, support one another in the ways that we see the early church supporting one another, breaking bread together, but then also kind of discipling one another in that space while then also participating in the large group gatherings. And so kind of with that, I don't have it here, but in thinking through this, one of the other examples that we see in the New Testament, and this is kind of like a common thing people talk about, is kind of the Paul, Timothy, Barnabas structure of where you are and who you are within the body. And so in that context in the New Testament, Paul obviously wrote many books in the New Testament, and he's kind of like the master teacher. Timothy would have been a student of his who was also going out and teaching others, and then Barnabas was essentially kind of a peer of Paul's. And so the idea is that as you're going through your own discipleship journey, you ought to have in your life Paul's, Timothy's, and Barnabas's, and you ought to be to someone else each of those things as well. And so I like to think that we are Barnabas's to one another. I think Marty probably thinks he's the Paul and I'm the Timothy, and that's fine.
Not true. You are quite wise, in my opinion.
But, and so particularly, maybe it's age-related, as I can see the cold hand of death coming for me faster and faster, that I think more about being a Paul, or I've opened myself up to more of being a Paul in some of those scenarios. But I would say in our body as well, we try to model that, and that's our goal. Are we successful at it? A lot of times, absolutely not. But that's what we're striving for, is to have everyone engaged in discipleship relationships of those sorts, where you can have yourself in those and be those to other people in the body, depending on where you're at in your own journey, in relationship to the other person, that sort of thing. And then similarly to what we saw there in the early church also, we have obviously Sunday morning gatherings like this where we are receiving, essentially expositional teaching from the Word as part of that intentional spiritual formation also.
Okay. We're going to pivot very briefly. I'm going to bring one of our friends up here. Surprise guest, Matt Grayum. Matt Grayum. Give it up for Matt. I can ask any questions. What's up, Matt?
Hey, Marty.
Matt has attended church here for 25 years. Just kidding. How long? I don't even know. Like 3 years, 2 years?
I haven't been tracking.
Tracking.
Couple years.
Couple years.
2 or 3 years.
But you have a very similar background to us, except maybe a different generation, a little bit younger. I know it doesn't
10 years.
look
I'm
like
40.
it. What?
10 years younger.
We don't have to go there. I'm not. Maybe this was a bad idea.
That's 8 for me. Marty's 2 years older than me, in case that wasn't officially on the record.
I don't know where we. This is. Oh, and now Dan's involved. Okay. So Matt, less than 5 minutes. Tell me your story, specifically your life in church and your testimony.
I grew up in a pastor's family. My dad was a pastor of a Baptist denomination, and I have 5 siblings, and I am the third. So I have 3 younger and 2 older, and I was involved with the church from nursery to graduation, and then even through graduation of high school, through leaving to college. I'll tell that in just a second. But so every time the door of the church was open, so I was a pastor's kid, you were a pastor's kid. Every time the church door was open, I was doing something here. And very involved with the kids programs, the youth programs, and everything that they offered. It was, I think they used to call it quiet time for the program we were doing, but it was like take time every day to spend with God, open your book, fill it out, and this is the very formulated way to do it. Come in and even show your work, on a weekly basis.
Whoa,
did you
that's
do
next
this? Do you get a gold
stuff.
star or not? Trying to inspire kids to be involved in that way. So yeah, every time the doors were open, I was there. And it was never preached directly, but my dad's the pastor, so it's also unique having your father as the pastor, right? I mean, you have a father relationship, but then you have this pastoral relationship. And trying to understand what as a kid, you don't understand what you're interpreting and what's not preached, right? And so I was interpreting, you do all of these things to have a relationship with God, as opposed to you have a relationship with God and these things develop in your life. So it was a little backwards to me, but I didn't know that at the time. I just found it very hard, and I'd look at myself kind of critically, not having that desire to keep up with all that was there. So I was a good kid, right? And part of it is everyone looks at you that way, and you start to kind of feel that mold a little bit, like Matt's the good kid. And we were really under a microscope of the church. I'd hear people say things like, well, did Pastor Graham's kids get to go watch this movie? Did Pastor Graham's kids, are they running in the church?
You got to see movies?
Not many. Not many. Aladdin was borderline, Aladdin. But so you kind of get through this perspective. I'm trying to do it in a short version here, just under a microscope, and then graduating through high school. And I was actually, it wasn't a negative thing to me at the time at all. It was actually some level of pride to it that I'm the pastor's son, and I'm involved in a large way. There was definitely some negative aspects to it. I remember I was probably acting out in the youth group, and one of the youth pastors, who was like an intern at the time, said, hey, you know better than that. You're a pastor's kid. And so things like that happened repeatedly. Again, I interpreted what that meant, and ended up actually being still inspired through all of this to want to be involved in the church at a pastoral level. I went off to college and ended up getting my Bachelor's of Science in Religion with a minor focus in youth ministry. That translated into about 10 or 12 years of serving on staff at the same church as my father and other staff members. And it wasn't until about, I'm going to go back to just pre-COVID, because that's a good time mark for everybody, that my marriage was pretty much on the rocks, because I was trying to navigate so much involved with the church. I was very hyper-focused and driven to provide opportunities for people in the church, just like we're doing here. And it got to a place where my wife was kind of like, well, this is not really what we were wanting. I feel like a single mother going to church, and you're involved here in a different way. And she thought maybe she could go find a different church. And I said to myself, this is not how I ever imagined it. And the way that I was raised, it felt like that would be divorce ultimately. If my wife goes to a different church than me, it was going to be like a really catastrophic type thing. So it was a crossroads for me. We ended up getting significant therapy for our marriage, and through that process, God just led me to resign my position with the church, which is unique again, because the pastor of the church is also my father. So we have a great relationship, but that was an interesting conversation to navigate, including my degree and kind of what I'd grown up in my life thinking was the way to go, and then pursuing it as this is going to be my life as a pastor in a church, to saying, I think I was inaccurate about the calling on my life. I was not called to be a pastor. Having that conversation and leaving that room, really to return home and just have big questions about life. What is life now? Because that's what 35 years old. At that point, that was everything that all of my life focus had been. Saying, well, that's over. Having a good cry and trying to figure out who I was in life. So that's there's a lot of stories in there that could be told, but that's really where I'm at today. So about 5 years removed from ministry service. Yeah.
So why do you still go? I mean, I'm just going to throw it out there. Like,
I heard the question when he answered it, and I'm thinking, man, we're in a little bit different place in life now, because I think I'm still kind of in the middle of that.
Yeah.
So 5 years ago during COVID, it had to be a God thing, but it was kind of coincidental, kind of opportunistic to say, well, it's COVID, people are kind of not going to church right now. I've removed myself from that role at church, which felt slightly awkward for me to be staying at that church, just sitting in the pews every week. And it was really hard for my brain to even fathom how that worked, because for 35 years, I was directly involved with the most minute portion. I mean, down to the details of business meetings and weekly meetings and sound ministry and how the guitar note sounds. I mean, every detail, so to sit there and just be like, I'm just going to be here. It got really unique. COVID came and I, not intentionally, kind of just happened. I just stepped away from the church, and slowly but surely 2 years passed. So you go 35 years where every minute, and then you go 2 years without it. I remember a thought in my head was like, so this is what it's like to be a backslidden Christian. These are the people that we always tried to understand and reach. So being on the other side of it was very interesting. And it was a joke for me to say backslidden Christian, because the reality is, in that time, I never once turned on my faith, salvation through Christ alone, and being inspired to even share that with people, because that is the core. But the word deconstruction, I think, is a hot topic button. Like, even for me to hear it goes, I wouldn't describe myself that way, but the reality is that's what is happening, right? So I would look at everything that I learned through my life and upbringing and start to question it a lot. Again, not my faith. So why am I here still today? One is because Pastor Marty's the pastor. And I didn't tell you I'd say that.
You did not tell me. Yeah.
During this period, you'd reached out, or we had just some random connection, probably a God thing, and let's go sit down and have coffee. I don't drink coffee, but we sat down and he had coffee.
Neither do I. I don't have coffee.
Oh, I don't remember if you had coffee either.
Some foofy drink, as Clay
Yeah,
calls
probably. Something fruity.
Yeah.
And what I found really interesting, and I'm not getting into all the weeds here with my 35 years upbringing, but the church can be really beautiful or really, really ugly. And I know you related to that.
Yeah.
And for me to share some stories, and for him to just be like, oh yeah, I know all about that. Been there, done that. To even some of the greatest horrific stories. He was very empathetic. And I felt like he could understand and relate. And that was a really big deal for me, because I'm still in a unique place right now. I'm not talking to you as a professional here. I'm jaded to a lot of things that the church offers. Even here, I am jaded to a lot of things. Not the gospel of Christ, but what it looks like to church.
Yeah.
And so why I'm here is largely in part, I'll button all that up because I'm not fully sure, but why I'm here is largely because you're empathetic to a lot of the history that I bring, but also for my family's sake. So I have 4 boys and a wife, and during this period of 2 years away, it was really, my wife very supportive. She's an amazing woman, but she didn't have the upbringing I had. So for her to take this step away was much more impactful and different for her than it was for me. While I felt like this is great, I'm healing, if you will. For her, it was like, I want to be there. So I'm largely in part here because of the things I mentioned, but also for my family, because it's not fully fair to say my experience is everybody's experience. So I can't take that away from them and that opportunity that they might have the positive experience that I know is at a church.
So what do you see as the purpose of church, or the primary purpose?
So I have my bachelor's of science in religion, but we're only here for a few minutes.
It's true.
And I also run a weekly podcast that runs 2 hours every week, so we'll keep this short. If I had to say, I think the function of how it appears is very different for every single church, the way that the thing I'm going to say appears. But simply, I'm going to say teach and to reach. So both discipleship, teaching, actually educating, inspiring, teaching in that method in a large group format can be one of the ways. And then to reach is to, obviously, to let that roll out of these walls. Now, again, how that all looks, very unique, and those are the questions that I think I get presented in my head with the most. Is this what church looks like?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's the function of it. I think that's what it's here for, teaching.
Do I have questions for him? I mean, I would have a lot of questions for him, but I will say, like, I appreciate sincere wrestling. I think sincere wrestling is almost our core calling, right, as followers. Because there's a lot to wrestle with in Scripture, and there's a lot to wrestle with in reconciling that with our world, with ourselves, and with our institutions, chief among them, the church, right? And so I'll take sincere wrestling any day over pretty much anything else, because it's engagement, it's honest, and there's an integrity to it. And so I would say, regardless of where you find yourself, you or anybody else, like, sincere wrestling is, if you're wrestling sincerely, you're probably in a good spot in the moment.
I'm glad you say that, because through those periods of years where I joked, this is what a backslidden Christian looks like, I remember thinking people were judging me, but that was partly due to my upbringing, because maybe I would have judged people in that scenario,
Baptist
right?
in you.
But I remember, I remember getting to this place and saying, one, I feel like for the first time, this is going to sound crazy, I felt like I actually experienced God's love for the first time in 35 years through leaving the church. So, but what was cool about that it is heavy, but what's cool, that's a whole nother podcast episode. But what was cool about that is that I experienced God's love, and I wasn't driven away from God. And through this period of time being removed from the church, I remember thinking to myself, you're sincerely wrestling with this, and God's okay with that, right?
100%.
And so that's where I ended up going, you know what? You haven't gone to church week after week. And I was like, this is more important that my relationship with God is growing and that I understand his love. The church is a unique part of it, but I'm still figuring that out.
Sincere wrestling. What I need you to do is not next week. I don't need everybody to sincerely wrestle next week, okay? But I do think, one of the scriptures we find in Genesis is a story of Jacob, and how Jacob, he had been there and back again. He had lied to his brother. He had gone through and married his wife, been sent away, had worked for his father-in-law, which is all sorts of trauma. And he comes back, and on his way back, he wrestles with God, right? And he becomes this really a new creation and is blessed beyond imagination. And I do think that one of the things I said on my birthday last week is, when I preached a message, is a family really should be about, it was 2 P's, finding each person's purpose instead of policy. And sometimes for safety, you need policy. Listen, Xander, you can't play on the hot stove, right? Like, there's some policy there. But for those of us adults, right, you come to a place where it's more important to find a purpose. And churches, especially that we grew up in, but there are others. Many of you grew up in churches where policy was really important. And maybe it was more important to find God's purpose for your life. And maybe some of you are wrestling with that. And that is really what we need to do as a church, is help each other find our purpose. And that's going to look different. It's going to be hard along the way, because, as you know, Matt's story is so powerful, because we've all gone through traumas, and we brought up the stuff that I went through back about 7-8 years ago, and many of us went through. Not every Christian is Christ-like, including me all the time, right? And so it's a battle. So my prayer for you, wherever you're at, as we move toward the fall, is that you would, and this was not even planned, but sincerely wrestle with who Jesus is in your life. Right? And I'm going to do this even though I have no business time-wise. Who cares? Any questions? Any questions for these two?
I'm a very open book. I'll answer anything.
We didn't know that. Any questions at all?
I have a statement.
Okay.
I think
Wrestling
wrestling's better than dying.
is better than dying. I hope you mean spiritually, but yes.
So what do you believe your calling is now?
Yeah, or TBD. Yeah, so that was interesting too, because what is calling anyways? Is that even a biblical? We could talk forever about everything, but what is calling directly? And I think it's the same for each person. It's to live authentically, letting Christ show through you. So for what it's worth, I feel like I might be more impactful as a Christian than I was as a pastor. And I hope that's the case for everybody that I come in contact with. So that's my calling right now.
What's your calling, Clay?
Oof. I don't honestly know, and I don't have a good answer to that, other than I would say my desire is to be useful. That's how I've been thinking about it lately.
I assume to Christ, but I don't want to assume that.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And just, yes.
All right. All right. Yeah. Oh.
What would you like to see in church that you don't see now?
In New England or back home? So interesting kind of thing that's happened in our church. We've had a lot of time here. I'll say what I would like to see happen in church more that I don't think is happening a lot, and I think is actually in a lot of places happening in reverse to the way that it should happen, is when Christ said, "Follow me," if you look at the early examples of people that did that, they literally, everything about themselves was left behind. They stopped being whatever they were being, and they became that follower of Christ, right?
Like Kirk Cameron left behind? Or?
Not that kind of left behind. And he's still here.
That's true.
That's a whole other conversation. No, and so the way that I like to think of it is our primary citizenship is elsewhere. And so when we look at the other people in our body, whether it's this local body, the bodies that I drove by on the way here, or that I flew over on the way here, or whatever, that we see each other as that first. And everything else is secondary to that. Whatever other disagreements I may have with you about a particular passage of Scripture, or whether we baptize this way or that way, or how you vote, or what you think about this, that, or the other, if we are members of the body, we are members of the body. It's a little bit like your family, right? Like, you all have family members that you're like, here comes cousin Joey. That guy's kind of crazy, but he's still my cousin, right? Like that is what it is. And I would like to see the church living that out first and foremost. I have this kind of thing that I keep slyly trying to get the leadership at our church to accept as our mantra that we say or that we publish, and I haven't been successful yet. But this is what it is: bringing the unity of Christ to a divided world. That's what I would like to see more of in the church, is bring that unity. Because if you are following Christ first, the rest of it is secondary. The nonsense we get tied up in here is secondary. It's not that it's not important to our lives and to our children's lives and all those things, but it's secondary. And I think the majority of the ills that befall us, both individually and corporately, all are derived. What's the word? Derived. That's the word I'm looking for. Derived from placing something else first, whether it's ourselves, our children,
Our
politics,
organizational church.
our organizational things, our denomination, our distinctives. Whatever those things are.
I'm a little jaded to the fact that I don't see unity ever happening in the church, but the striving for it, obviously, I would agree with. So I think the biggest thing that I would say is something I would love to see in the church, because I didn't really ever experience it, is love between one another. Phileo, brotherly, the idea of I actually have your best interest in mind and I want to be there for you, however that looks. Somebody has a need, we're all just like, man, let's just do that, right? Or this is a rough time, let's just love him, let's just love, 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 love. Like, didn't really see that acted out a lot.
Well, and that's the other commandment, right? Like, they'll know you are my followers by the way that you love one another, right? And so that's where we're definitely failing.
And I feel like I see that more outside of the church than in the church. And I don't know if that resonates with anybody. But you have other communities that you're a part of. And yeah, you'll have conflict. You'll have conflict, but it's resolved in a different way than excommunication, right? Often. So it's like in your other communities, it's okay to disagree at a lot of times. Like, hey, they just think that way. That's okay. They're cool. Inside the church, it gets hard like that, right? Where it's like, well, they think that way, but that can't be a part of how our church is. So it's a different level. But yeah, I agree. These are great conversations to have.
I wonder if that was true during COVID. That there was that much acceptance outside of. On that note, let's pray. Thank you for listening, guys. Honestly, let's shower these guys with thanks as we leave. But also, But also, what they said is really important in striving to be the church that we're called to be. Yes, organizationally, but more specifically, the bride of Christ. Father, I thank you so much for bringing us to this place, to be a part of this conversation.